Welcome to Tambellini Group's latest installment of our Women in Technology Spotlight series. In these interviews, we showcase the career paths, accomplishments, and perspectives of the remarkable women leading technology strategy at colleges and universities around the country. And today we are lucky enough to be joined by Kendra Strode, who's the Director of IT Support and Outreach for Rollins College just outside of Orlando, Florida. Welcome, Kendra.
Hello, thank you, Elizabeth. I'm happy and thrilled to be here.
We're very excited to have you. I'd like to start things off by asking you, before we talk about your work, what did you think you wanted to be when you grew up and why?
Yeah, absolutely. So for the longest time, I was sure I was going to be a veterinarian. I loved animals, and then I tried that on, and I'd watch vet shows, and it turns out I'm not great with blood and things not pointing in the right direction. So that career was right out. And I also realized that I wanted to be a teacher. That kind of stuck with me. I had some phenomenal teachers, elementary through high school, and I was like, you know what? That's really great. I'd love to be like them. And so I figured for a long time I was going to be a teacher. I got to high school, loved my physics course, and I was absolutely certain when I went off to college that I was going to be a high school physics teacher.
Okay, so since that time, what happened that led you into the role of being an IT leader at a university or a college, rather?
Yeah, so I went to school in southern Minnesota, loved it. I was a physics major, enjoyed it, and realized in my junior year that I could probably go back to teaching at various points in my career, but that there were other adventures I wanted to have. I'm an avid swing dancer, and so I knew I wanted to travel a little bit to be able to do that. And so there were just a lot of opportunities I felt like I hadn't explored. So I was like, okay, I'll maybe go back to teaching later. Now what? And I didn't have a clear answer to that. Well, I had also been selected as an incoming first year student to work at our IT support help desk. At that point, we were doing student tech support, and I loved that job. After my first year, I stayed and worked multiple summers. I just savored the experience of being able to poke or prod at a problem and help somebody better understand their computer, better understand how to solve a problem, or just get back and teach classes. And in that role, I actually started developing training for my fellow student technicians, and I realized I am teaching. It may not be in a traditional classroom, but what I do every day is teaching people, whether it's the people who are providing support or the people who are getting support. And I loved that. And so I figured, okay, maybe I'll stay in this career path a little and see where it leads. And a job opened up at my institution. I took it and I worked there for several years. And so honestly, so much of it has been serendipity. But in terms of what got me to where I am now, I did a brief stint in college admissions in the middle of everything and got a much better understanding of the bigger picture operations of a college, what makes it work. And I loved how IT was a part of that, that we can kind of support all of the different branches of research, and we can support athletics, and we can do just be part of all of those machinations. And so then the question was, what's next? And so I had amazing support from colleagues all across the country and world through organizations like ACM SIGUX and EDUCAUSE. And I was able to participate in some management institutes and see that yeah, this is what I want to do. I like the technical problems, but I also like finding out how people can support the technology the best. So I actually just finished my master's in management of technology this past spring and was applying for new jobs in the middle of the pandemic because I figured, hey, what the heck? I could be in my living room in Minnesota or somewhere else. And threw a job application out at Rollins, and they decided to give me a chance. And so now I'm the director out there of IT support and outreach.
That's exciting. You certainly had an interesting career trajectory. I love hearing you talk about the role of teaching because it seems to me in any sort of leadership role, you constantly have to be a teacher and a learner. So on that note, I'm wondering, can you give us a sense of what a week in the life of Kendra Strode is like in this role of Director of IT Support and Outreach?
Absolutely. As is no surprise to many, I think each week comes with its own unique challenges. We're just, for example, coming out of dealing with the Log4j vulnerabilities. And that was a really interesting week because it was pulling together people from my team and across the department to figure out how are we going to respond to this major issue while we have folks who have already left campus. And so we had to do some really creative problem solving. And so while the problem may change from week to week, that ability to bring the right people together and just come up with a solution for what is facing us right now. What are our constraints? What are the challenges? How fast do we need to go? Who knows about it? How do we communicate? That type of just cyclical putting out whatever fire is coming up, that's a big part of my weeks. But then also it is how do we actually kind of keep the gears of the college turning? So my team does the deployment and imaging of new computers. Well, it turns out that that is a lot trickier when there's a global supply chain issue. And so we've been bringing people together, looking at our constraints, trying to find creative ways to solve that problem. And so from things that we are responding to because they're a surprise change to the day-to-day challenges, one of the constants is working with my team and the team across IT. And then how do we make sure that we're good partners to the rest of campus? So I think the other biggest thing that I do in my week is ask questions. I'll
Mhm.
get a notification from another team that they need to do a change or they need to release some element of one of our major enterprise systems. And so then my questions are, okay, what are our next steps? Is there a backup plan? How likely is this to disrupt users? What is the time span? Just brainstorming all of those different ways that a change could be seen, could disrupt classes, could impact processing of payroll, any of those types of things, so that then we can get ourselves a good timeline, a good communications plan. So figuring out how we're responding to the questions and asking the right questions, those are big parts of my day-to-day life. And then it's all sorts of other things in between, whether it's getting to know faculty so that we can really understand, is the technology that we're providing them meeting their needs? Or getting out there and having conversations with students about why, yes, multi-factor is a little bit of a hassle, but really it helps keep you safe. And art is what we're saying, getting to them and getting through to them. Finding those ways to connect the dots is one of the other things and one of the things I love the most.
That's great. I mean, it sounds like you wear so many different hats. You're part teacher, you're part student. You just gotten your master's. I know we've
Mhm.
discussed you even have the swing dance background and you do a lot of things around that. And you're a troubleshooter, you're a scavenger hunt
Yeah.
manager in some ways with these global supply chain issues. And, we've had these large attacks. We've also had, as we all know, we've seen some campuses have to empty early because of spreading Omicron concerns and everything else like that. So I think this question may be a bit tough for you to narrow down on, especially given your energy and enthusiasm for all the roles you hold and the hats you wear. But is there something that you find to be the most satisfying part of your work? Like, can you tell us about a recent project aside from, this triage mode, it seems you've got to be constantly in, but any long-term initiatives? I know that you said you've been at Rollins for about 8 months now, so it may be a bit premature to see something that has been a multi-year project bear fruition, but if there's anything long-term either in this role or in your previous role where you look at that and you're particularly proud and gratified by what you've done and the outcomes.
Yeah. I can think of just a couple of little snippets. One is something that's been totally new and unique in my role as director here, and then one that's sort of a carryover from my previous institution. So, for the totally new experience, as a leadership team, the directors of IT and then our CIO, we actually went through a several months project to develop a strategic plan to help focus our efforts of IT. IT at Rollins has so many phenomenal people, and Rollins as a community is a very relational based organization. And one of the things we were trying to do is how do we take this environment where we're used to this one on one relationship way of getting things done, which is very wonderful and personal, but then you end up with a pile of stuff that can be hard to sift through, to being a little bit more purposeful. How do we make steps that are best for the college overall? And so we got to work with a really great consultant and actually start thinking strategically. So for me, it was satisfying to bring some things from my master's program, but also learn from the experience of my fellow directors and CIO, and be getting to know a place like Rollins and a new institution to put those pieces together to come up with a plan that I think we're all really excited about. We're kind of putting the finishing touches on it. And one of the things I love most is that from our CIO down, there's this great drive to make sure that it's not just a piece of paper that sits on a shelf. And so we're already putting pieces into place to make sure that on a daily basis, we're kind of checking in to see, are we making progress on our goals without overemphasizing metrics? Are we actually, the projects that we have that are so important, do they line up with this plan? And if not, how do we start rethinking that? And so that's just been really satisfying to actually go through that process. That has been a new experience for me and one that has been deeply satisfying. So that's that example. The other project I'm really excited to embark on, we're going to start next semester. And so that is kind of reviewing, revising, and cleaning up our ticketing system. And at my previous institution, I got to build our ticketing system from the ground up. Here I get to look at their established system, understand their processes and workflows, and figure out how to combine that with those experiences of best practices, EDUCAUSE recommendations, to really make this tool sing for them. And I'm excited to do that too.
Yeah, that is the ticketing for, is that for support tickets or?
For all of IT, really. And actually, there are a few other little pockets of campus that are starting to make use of that same system. And so we can pass tickets from one area like IT to facilities isn't in yet, but I know that they've mentioned interest. And so trying to lay a nice solid foundation so that we could build for that future is one of the things that we're hoping to do.
Yeah, that's, I mean, again, it sounds like you're doing so much there, and I can imagine it's gratifying, especially when you've had this experience of building a system to get to troubleshoot another one, find the vulnerabilities and make it better. That sounds
Yeah.
exciting. So this next question is one of my favorites, and you certainly seem to have your finger on the pulse of what's going on in so many different divisions and functions of your institution. But I'm wondering, if a genie in a bottle were to emerge and said they could answer one question for you about the future of tech and higher ed. I know there's still a lot of uncertainty around so many things. What would you like to know?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a fascinating and tricky question. I think there's a lot of stress and anxiety about exactly what shape higher ed will take. How much are we going to be in person? How much are we going to be virtual? I think many of us have come to learn that hybrid offerings are the hardest thing you could ever possibly try to do. And so there's part of me that's curious about that question, but I think that there are a lot of great people thinking about how that's going to pan out. And personally, I know that there are touch points of those in-person interactions that aren't necessarily replaceable. So I think I'd take this in a totally different tact. I remember when the iPad first came out, it was a really nifty toy.
Mm-hmm.
That was about it. Like, it was really hard to envision how it was going to actually be useful and not only enable things like teaching and learning, but enhance them. And we just came through a pandemic where my previous institution and Rollins made amazing use of iPads, especially with the addition of the Apple Pencil as a pedagogical tool, using it so you could do your whiteboarding and your drawing, or you can use some of the different sort of bite-sized applications that have just so much more power and capability. And going from a point in time where you're like, wow, that's a nifty toy, to this is a critical tool in our response to the pandemic, that's a fascinating transition for me. And so, really, I think my question is, what are the technologies today that we're not giving enough credit? What maybe needs a little bit more experimentation and play to really make it sing and to make the higher ed environment come alive with technology? Is it going to be AR and VR? Can we find these more immersive ways to connect the virtual and the in-person experience? Questions along those lines. So, what is the technology that we're just not thinking about in the right way yet, or that has one more development coming that then is going to change the playing field for how it's used in higher ed? I think that's a fascinating question. I'd be curious to hear the answer.
I completely agree with you. I think we talked a lot here at Tambellini about, VR, AR were things that were really expected to to take off. The pandemic was their moment, but this idea of what are the tools that,
Hmm.
what are the toys that seem just like toys that can be used as tools, because you have these issues of expense and just viability, or even during the pandemic there wasn't time to think thoughtfully about how to integrate these things, but it can be very uh, attractive to look at some of these toys and say, oh, can we get that in the classroom? But is that just a shiny thing that everyone gets excited about, or does it really have the application? There is still so many things to figure out around that. So I really, really like your answer there, Kendra. Um, I think in closing, what I'd like to do is ask you, given your experience, you've obviously held a lot of different roles. You said you've worked in admissions as well. Do you have any advice for fellow female leaders, emerging leaders in higher ed technology on how to approach their work, or lessons that you've learned that you think apply good advice for the future?
I would not be anywhere equipped to do what I'm doing without the amazing support structure that I have stumbled into, that I built, that has kind of happened around me. So this is like my secret way of saying networking is really important. Um, but packaging it in a way, I hated that answer. When I was getting started in my career, I didn't want to go into management. I didn't want to go into leadership. Networking felt so structured and so corporate and so formal. But it's not. It's the conversations that you have with your peers. Part of why I love higher education is we are such a collaborative space. And I can reach out to anybody at pretty much any institution to be like, hey, so I see you're using this tool. We're going to start using it and have questions about it. Do you have anybody who can answer our questions? And 9 times out of 10, you'll get an answer back. That's networking. It's the conferences where you get to speak to people throughout their career path so that 1 year, 2 year, 5 years down the road, when I hit a stumbling block or I have questions about a next step, I'm like, you know what? Actually, I know that this person that I met at this conference has been there, and I can send them a line because I've been chatting with them all along in Slack through our conference support. I have had amazing bosses, mentors, coaches who I still chat with on the regular when I hit moments like, how do I handle this situation? This was a huge step up for me into being a director. I had worked at the help desk as a technician before that. I helped oversee a team of 60 student staff members, providing their training and providing some backup for their employment, but I wasn't their supervisor. And so my CIO had asked, like, how is that going to work? And I said, I can take some of what I've learned from this, and then I can ask questions of you and the people around me and those people who have come before and who have helped solve some of these problems. That has made it so much easier then to tackle not just the normal challenges of IT, but those set in the context of a pandemic and a global supply chain disruption, so that they are, on good days, invigorating problems to continue to solve. So if anything, unpacking that sense that networking is something formal and something scary. Even just for me asking for a mentor, I didn't think I needed one or that I wanted one because I had some built up idea of what that meant. And it's not. It's somebody who you can just talk to openly and honestly about what you're dealing with. They can challenge you and push you. And it has been one of the most productive relationships in my professional career. So just get out of your head. Networking and mentoring are amazing things. They don't have to be formal. They don't have to be scary. Embrace them because they have at least helped me really supercharge the things that I can do and make it a little bit less scary and a little bit less intimidating to take that next step and that next risk.
That's great advice. It's something I think we can all take away from, even if we're not working in technology. A lot of what you said resonated with me because we do get ideas built up in our head on what certain things mean, and really it's about engagement and collaboration. So thank you so much, Kendra, for taking the time today to be our featured guest for Women in Technology Spotlight Series. I think our viewers will certainly learn a lot from your experience and perspectives that you've shared.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, Elizabeth. It was an honor, and I am glad to have had the chance to speak with you.